The Vreth warships came out of jump space like a wall of black iron moving against the stars. And they did not come quietly. They came with open broadcast channels and loud voices, and the kind of arrogance that only grows in a species that has never once lost a war. Grand Admiral Kesrath stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Supremacy, and he looked at the sensor readout showing Earth's defense fleet, and he laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was not a small laugh. It was the kind of laugh that fills a room and bounces off the walls and makes everyone around it feel smaller. "That is their fleet," he said, to no one in particular, waving one long gray hand at the display screen, as if he were pointing out something embarrassing at a market. His officers laughed with him. Sub-Commander Ivrex, a lean and careful soldier who had served in 14 campaigns, smiled thinly and studied the readout with genuine curiosity. He counted 81 human ships. Some of them were old enough that their hull signatures matched models the Vreth database listed as outdated by 40 years. Several were clearly civilian transport ships that had been given weapons and armor and pushed into formation. The orbital platforms around the blue-white planet were ancient things, slow-rotating and boxy, built more for surveillance than combat. The Vreth fleet numbered 906 active warships. It had firepower sufficient to crack open a moon if needed. It had won on 43 worlds before this one, and it had never once retreated. Kesrath ordered the open channel kept live. He wanted the humans to hear him. He wanted them to understand what was happening before it happened. In his experience, defeated species were easier to manage if they had been fully humiliated first. Resistance collapsed faster when pride was broken before bodies were. "Creatures of the third planet," he announced, in the flat translated signal his comm array produced. "You are looking at the end of your independent existence. We have studied your military history. We have read your wars. We have counted your ships and measured your weapons, and we are not impressed. You have had 200 years of warning that species like ours exist, and you have spent them building this collection of old metal and good intentions." He paused for effect. "Surrender within 6 hours, and your population will be reclassified as a working colony. Resist, and the reclassification will be less comfortable." The response from the human fleet was silence. Not panicked silence, not desperate silence, just silence, as if the person on the other end had heard what he said and chosen not to answer yet. The way a person might choose not to argue with a stranger in the street, because the argument was not yet worth having. Ivrex noticed the silence, and did not find it funny. He noticed other things too. The human ships were not in a defensive cluster. They were spread in a wide, flat pattern that made no sense as a shield formation, but would make a great deal of sense as a net, if there were anything behind the Vreth fleet to catch. There was not. He filed the thought away. On the bridge of the human flagship, a smaller and older ship called the Patient Cause, General Yara Osei sat in the command chair, with both feet flat on the floor, and her hands resting on the arms of the seat, and her eyes on the sensor display. She was a compact woman of 53, with close-cut gray hair, and a face that showed very little of what she was thinking at any given moment. Around her, her officers were quiet and tense, in the way that soldiers get quiet and tense when the thing they have been trained for is finally in front of them, and is bigger than they expected. Lieutenant Davin, her youngest bridge officer, 26 years old and extremely aware of it, was gripping the edge of his console with both hands. He kept looking at the Vreth fleet count on his screen, and then looking at the friendly force count, and then looking back at the Vreth number as if he was hoping one of them would change. "General," he said quietly, "they have 906 ships." "I know," Osei said. "We have 81. "I know. That is," he stopped himself, "a ratio," she said, "that we planned for." She did not look away from the display. "Davan, what is the current drift of their lead formation?" He looked at his console. "They are holding position, General. Standard challenge arc. Textbook Vreth positioning." "Textbook," she repeated, and something in her voice was almost warm. She pressed one button on her armrest. Engineering. Begin the cold sequence on Array 7. She pressed another button. Lunar Command. You are now on active standby. She pressed a third. All fleet units, this is Osei. Hold your positions and hold your noise. We let them come to us. No one fires until my voice gives the word. And those words are specific. Davan looked at her. What are the words, General? She looked at him for the first time since the Vreth fleet arrived. Her expression was calm in a way that was almost frightening. You will know them when you hear them, she said. Kesrath, still waiting for a reply, turned to Ivrex. What do you think they are doing? Ivrex was quiet for a moment. Thinking, he said at last. Kesrath dismissed this with a gesture. They have 6 hours to think. After that, we move. He straightened in his command throne and looked out at the starfield and the distant blue planet and all the ships between him and it. This one will be fast, he said, with complete confidence. They always are. At the end. On the patient cause, Osei pulled up a secondary screen and looked at a map that had been built over the past 60 years by people who were no longer alive to see if it would work. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded it away, leaned back in her chair, and waited. The bunker under Geneva sat 200 meters below the surface of the Earth, and it smelled like recycled air and old coffee and the particular kind of focus that fills a room when everyone in it understands that what happens next will matter for a very long time. General Yara Osei had been in this bunker before. She had run simulations here, attended planning meetings here, eaten cold meals here at 3 in the morning while reading tactical models that stretched across centuries of human military thinking. This place felt like a second home to her, which was not a comfortable thing to admit about a bunker. She was on the secure link now, watching the Vreth fleet hold its position beyond Jupiter's orbit, while Earth's government argued in the chambers above her about what public message to release. The politicians wanted something that sounded strong. Osei had no interest in what sounded strong. She had interest in what would work. Her second-in-command, Colonel Reth Nadar, a tall man with a permanent tension in his jaw and 20 years of deep space military service behind him, stood beside her with a tablet showing fleet positioning data. He was one of the people who had helped build the plan. He had been building it for 11 years. They will advance when the ultimatum expires, he said. Yes, Osei said. And when they do, they will use a standard challenge push formation. That is what their records show in every engagement they have documented. That is what they always do, she said. That is the thing about an empire that has never lost. They find something that works, and they keep using it, because nothing has ever made them change. This was the truth of what humanity had learned in 200 years of knowing that alien fleets existed, and that one of them, eventually, would come. Other species, when threatened, built bigger weapons, or stronger shields, or faster ships. Humans had done those things too, with limited success, because humanity had never had the resources, or the numbers, or the time to match the Vreth ship for ship. Instead, humans had gone back to what they knew. They went back to their own history. And their own history was a very specific and very strange document. No other species in the known galaxy had fought quite the way humans had fought each other. The records of Earth's wars, 2 full centuries of digitized military archives that Earth's analysts had spent decades studying, showed a pattern that no alien intelligence had found interesting, because no alien intelligence had ever needed to think the way humans had thought. Smaller forces defeating larger ones, not through luck, but through preparation, deception, terrain control, the deliberate sacrifice of position to gain information, the use of the enemy's expectations as a weapon. Humans had names for all of it. Asymmetric warfare, attritional doctrine, psychological operations, ambush architecture. The Vreth had never needed any of these concepts, because the Vreth had always been the biggest force in any room they entered. Osei remembered a conversation with her old instructor, a general named Pacheco, who had retired before the Vreth contact was confirmed, but had spent 40 years writing the doctrine that now sat in the heads of every Earth military commander worth anything. Pacheco had said, in that dry and certain voice of his, that the most dangerous moment for any empire is not when it faces an enemy stronger than itself, but when it faces an enemy that fights in a way it has never seen before. He had said that surprise, real surprise, the kind that rewrites what a soldier thinks is possible, does not come from new weapons. It comes from new ideas used with complete commitment against an opponent who does not know those ideas exist. The Array 7 system had been built in 2141 by a team of engineers and military planners who were not alive today. It consisted of 11,000 autonomous weapons platforms, each one small enough to be cold silent in space, and virtually invisible to standard Vreth sensor sweeps. They had been positioned across 6 separate deployment zones over 40 years, moved gradually, updated remotely, never activated in a way that would produce a readable energy signature. The Vreth fleet would have no record of them. They had never been tested in live combat. Beside Array 7, there was the Mesh, a network of 31,000 relay satellites woven through the inner solar system, running a targeting system designed by an artificial intelligence that had been trained specifically on Vreth armor geometry, Vreth fleet formations, and the structural weak points that Vreth engineers had never bothered to fix, because no weapon in their experience had ever been positioned to exploit them. And then there was the doctrine itself, the rule that said Earth's visible fleet would retreat in the face of advance, would appear to break, would pull the Vreth into the zone where all of these hidden systems were waiting. The retreat was the weapon. The fear it was supposed to produce in the watching human crews was the price of admission. Lieutenant Davin's voice came over the comm from the flagship. General, the 6-hour window expires in 40 minutes. Understood, Osei said. Nadar looked at her. How are the crews holding? She thought about it honestly. They are scared, she said. That is correct. That is the right response to what they are looking at. She set down her coffee cup. Scared soldiers who have a clear plan and complete trust in their orders are the most functional soldiers in existence. Scared soldiers with no plan are the problem. Our people have the plan. She picked up her jacket from the back of her chair. I am going back to the flagship. Nadar nodded. The plan works, he said, with the tone of a man reminding himself. The plan works, she agreed, with the tone of a woman who had checked it 10,000 times, and was aware that this was still the first time it would be real. The 6-hour window closed, and the Vreth fleet began to move. It was not a slow movement. 906 warships did not drift forward. They advanced the way a wall advances when someone pushes it, with the certain heavy weight of something that does not expect to be stopped. Grand Admiral Kesrith watched his tactical display, with the satisfaction of a man who had done this many times before, and found it always went the same way. The human fleet was ahead of him, small and spread thin, and it would either fight in place and be destroyed, or run and be destroyed more slowly. For a brief moment, the human fleet did neither. Then it ran. Or rather, it appeared to run. To Kesreth's sensors, the 81 Earthships suddenly broke formation and pulled back toward the inner solar system, accelerating hard, breaking into scattered groups, losing their pattern. On the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy, officers began talking faster, excited by what looked like a rout. Someone laughed. The mood was of a hunt that had just become simpler. They are retreating, said the tactical officer, a young Vreth named Seroth, who had graduated top of his class and had never been in a battle. Yes, said Kesreth. Ivrek said nothing. He watched the sensor feed, and he watched the human ships, and he thought about the flat spread formation they had been holding before the advance. And he thought about the retreat. And he thought about the way the retreat looked almost perfect. Every ship pulling back at the correct angle to avoid collision. Every separation clean. Every course line maintaining a coherent overall shape, even as it appeared chaotic. That was not the behavior of a fleet that was panicking. That was the behavior of a fleet that was dancing. He almost said something. He did not. The Vreth fleet accelerated deeper into the solar system. They crossed the orbital path of Jupiter. They passed the asteroid belt. They were closing on the orbit of Mars when Kesreth noticed that the human ships had stopped. All of them, holding a fixed coordinate grid, perfectly still, aligned on a position that Kesrath's charts identified as a point in space approximately 800,000 kilometers from Earth's moon, which was currently on the far side of Earth from the Vreth advance. The position had no tactical significance that Kesrath could identify. There were no stations there, no defensive installations, no planetary bodies. The human ships sat in their positions like they were waiting for a bus. Kesrath stared at the display. What are they doing? Ivrex very quietly said, Admiral, I recommend we slow our advance. Why? Ivrex looked at the sensor feed. Because I do not know why they stopped there. Kesrath waved this away. They stopped there because they ran out of options. He opened the open channel again. He wanted to hear the human commander's voice before the end. In his experience, they always sounded different at this point. Tighter, faster, the controls slipping. The voice that answered him was General Yara Osei, and it was calm. Grand Admiral, she said, you are now inside the engagement zone. There was a small pause that was not dramatic in the way a dramatic pause is meant to be. It was simply the pause of a person finishing one thought before beginning the next. This is your notification. Kesrath opened his mouth to respond. The first volley came from nowhere. It did not come from the human ships in front of him. It came from empty space on his fleet's left flank, from a spread of small platforms that had been drifting cold and dark for decades, and had just activated simultaneously on a single remote signal. The targeting system running them had been calculating firing solutions for 6 hours, updating in real time as the Vreth fleet moved, identifying the exact angles and timing and sequence that would do the maximum damage to the maximum number of ships in the first 30 seconds. The lead Vreth dreadnought, Voice of Dominion, took 47 simultaneous hits across its unshielded port-facing structural grid. It went dark in 11 seconds. Not damaged, gone from the display. Then the mesh came alive, and the inside of the solar system turned into something that the Vreth fleet had no framework for understanding. The Vreth fleet was not destroyed. General Yara Osei had made a choice about that. The choice had been made before the battle began, which was how most of her choices were made, in advance, in quiet rooms, by people who understood that a battle is not just the thing that happens on the day, but the thing that happens in every day after. The Array 7 platforms had reserve capacity. The mesh targeting system had solutions for every remaining Vreth ship. The math was not complicated. She could end the fleet entirely within the next 40 minutes if she chose to. She did not choose to. She opened a direct channel to the Eternal Supremacy. Grand Admiral Kesrath appeared on her screen, and he looked like a different being than the one who had broadcast his mockery 6 hours ago. He was not panicking. Kesrath was too old and too experienced to panic visibly, but the composure was thinner now, stretched over something that was trying to show through. His fleet had lost 312 ships. 1,100 of his remaining vessels were reporting damage of various levels. His munitions were below 50% across the board. His wounded were being counted in the tens of thousands, and his tactical display showed him an engagement zone he did not know how to exit cleanly. General Osei, he said. Grand Admiral, she said. She did not add anything to that. She let him speak. He was silent for a moment. He was not a man who surrendered easily, and was feeling his way around the edges of what he was actually being asked to do. You have the capability to finish this engagement, he said. Yes, she said. Why haven't you? She looked at him across the comm channel and thought about how to say what she wanted to say in a way that he would be able to carry away from this conversation and put down somewhere useful. Because what happens to your fleet today is less important than what happens in every star system that receives your report tomorrow, she said. If I destroy your fleet, the Dominion sends a larger one, and this conversation never takes place. If your fleet withdraws having learned something that changes what the Dominion thinks is possible. This conversation echoes for a long time. Kesrath was quiet again. He was thinking in the way that a person thinks when they are on the edge of an idea that reorganizes other things they already knew. "You want us to carry a message," he said. "I want your fleet to go home," she said. "And I want every officer on every ship to write exactly what they saw today in their official reports, without any adjustment for how it reflects on Dominion military assessment. I want the Dominion to have an accurate picture of what a defense of this system costs." She paused for just a moment. "I also want the navigational and population data for the 43 systems you currently occupy." Kesrath studied her. "That is not a small request." "No," she agreed. "And if we refuse the second request?" "Then we continue the engagement," she said simply. "And the report that gets carried home will be written by whoever survives, which will be fewer people." He looked at her for a long moment, and then looked off to the side at something outside the camera frame. "We came here expecting nothing," he said. "I know," she said. "We thought this would take 4 hours." "I know that too." He turned back to the camera. His face was composed again, but composed in a different way. The composure of a man who had recalculated and found a number he did not like, but could not argue with. "You will have the data," he said. "And the fleet withdraws." "Thank you, Admiral," she said. He paused before cutting the channel, and the pause had a question in it that Ivrex, standing behind him out of camera frame, recognized as the question the Admiral had been carrying since the Cascade swarm hit the decoys. Kesrath finally let it out. "Were you afraid," he asked, "through any of this?" Osei looked at the question directly. She did not smile, and she did not look away. "That is why we prepared." The channel closed. The Vreth fleet began its withdrawal over the next 3 hours. A slow and careful process that its commanders managed with extreme attention to not triggering any further response from the human systems, still lighting up their sensor displays from every direction. The fleet that had come in making noise left in complete silence, which was perhaps the most honest thing it had done since arriving. On the bridge of the patient cause, Davin watched them go. He watched the count on his screen drop from over 500 to 400 to 300 as the Vreth ships cleared the engagement zone and began their transit back toward deep space. At some point during the withdrawal, without planning to, he realized he had unclenched his hands from the edge of the console. He had been holding it for 6 hours without noticing. "General," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he expected, "they are clearing the outer boundary." "Good," Osei said. "We did it," he said. She looked at him, and for just a moment her expression softened in a way that suggested she understood exactly how he felt, and remembered what it was to feel it for the first time. "We did the thing that was prepared for us to do by people who are not here anymore," she said. "The doing was theirs. We were just the ones present for the result." He thought about that for a moment. "Is that how it always works?" "That is how the good ones work," she said. She stood up from the command chair and walked to the viewport at the front of the bridge, and stood there with her hands at her sides, and looked out at the stars, and the retreating lights of the Vreth fleet, and the blue-white planet below them that still existed because a great many people, over a great many years, had decided, without guarantee or certainty, that preparation was worth more than prayer. The solar system was quiet. The channels from a dozen other species, who had been watching on passive sensors, were already beginning to activate, requesting contact, using the word that no one in the Dominion's client worlds had been able to use safely before today. Talk. Osei looked at all of it and let out one long, slow breath that she had been holding, in one way or another, for a very long time. Then she turned back to her bridge and said, "Get me a line to Geneva. There is a lot of work to do." Sub-Commander Ivrex had been in 14 campaigns. He had seen ships destroyed before. He had seen formations collapse and flanks fail and lines break under fire. He was not a man who was easily shaken. But standing on the bridge of the eternal supremacy, watching his tactical display become a map of chaos in real time. He felt something he could not immediately name. It took him several seconds to identify it as a very specific kind of fear. The fear that comes not from danger itself, but from the sudden understanding that you do not know what is happening, and the person on the other side does. The platforms that had taken out the voice of Dominion were already gone. Small, fast, single use, designed to fire once and self-destruct before return fire could target them. New volleys were coming from different positions. Not random positions. Positions that changed every time the Vreth fleet attempted a counter-formation. As if whoever was controlling the incoming fire had anticipated each counter-formation and had weapons already placed at the angle that would punish it. "They knew what positions we would take," said the tactical officer Saroth, in a voice that had lost its earlier excitement and was now doing its best to stay professional. "They knew our doctrine," Ivrex said. He moved to the weapons console and looked at the spread of incoming fire vectors. "They studied us, not just our ships, our tactics." He looked at the display and saw the pattern that was trying to form in his mind, and did not want to, because it meant something large and bad. They built this around what we would do, not what we might do, what we would do. Kesrath was issuing orders in rapid succession: counter-rotation, formation Bravo 7, shield concentration on the port flank, accelerate toward the human line to close the range. Each order was correct by Vreth tactical doctrine. Each order, 30 seconds after it was given, produced a new wave of fire from a direction that punished it. Ivrex noticed something else then, and it was the thing that began to truly change his understanding of what was happening. He noticed the human fleet's communications intercepts. His signals team had been running passive capture on human comms throughout the battle, and what those comms showed was not what he expected. There was no shouting. There were no voices raised in urgency or alarm. There was calm, coordinating language, the kind of language used by people managing a scheduled task. Someone on one of the human ships was narrating coordinates in a flat reading voice. On another ship, two officers were having a short conversation about the timing of a secondary sequence. Their tone, the tone of two people solving a small puzzle. On a third ship, in the background of a tactical update, someone was eating something that made a crunching sound. The humans were not panicking. The humans were working. Ivrex turned to Kesrath. "Admiral, they built all of this before we arrived." Kesrath did not respond immediately. He was watching the display, watching the count of his ships. In the first 4 minutes of engagement, he had lost 61 vessels. He had lost more ships in 4 minutes than the Vreth Dominion had lost in its previous 3 campaigns combined. "Use the Cascade Swarm," he said. Ivrex stopped. The Cascade Swarm was the Dominion's most powerful tactical formation. 240 ships executing a coordinated, multi-vector strike pattern that had been used in combat 19 times and had never once failed to break an opposing line. It was complicated, it was expensive, it was decisive. No enemy had ever survived it. "Admiral, if they anticipated our other formations, the Cascade has never failed," Kesrath said, and his voice was the voice of a man holding something he needed to believe in. "Initiate." 240 Vreth ships began the Cascade Swarm sequence. They spread into the required arcs, accelerating toward 47 separate fire vectors, executing the pattern with the precision of a military that had drilled it for generations. They hit 47 separate targets and destroyed all of them in 90 seconds. Saroth called out the results in a voice of relief. The pattern had worked. Then the sensor display updated and showed that the 47 targets were debris fields with no power signatures, no life readings, no mass consistent with crewed vessels. They were automated decoys. They had been placed in exactly the positions the Cascade Swarm was designed to strike, as if someone had mapped the swarm's targeting algorithm and built false targets to match it. The Cascade Swarm had used 30% of the fleet's munitions. The real human ships had not moved. Ivrex looked at Kesrath. Kesrath looked at the display. The bridge was very quiet. Ivrex heard